Maple Harbor was a small coastal town where folks believed storms only brought salty winds and cold rain, never strong enough to wash away secrets buried deep in its heart. But on that bleak Tuesday morning, the storm tearing at the harbor's edge shredded the fragile calm everyone pretended to trust. Chief Lucas Bennett pushed open the precinct door, raindrops dripping from his hat onto the collar of his heavy coat. After more than 20 years serving Maple Harbor, he had seen it all: drunken shouting matches at the docks, fishermen vanishing into the waves, mysteries that never found answers. Yet nothing had left him as speechless as what came through that door today. The wooden door creaked, revealing a shadow stepping carefully across rain-slicked tiles. Deputy Aaron Hayes, only 2 years in the force but steady as a rock, held her breath when she saw the massive German shepherd. Its fur clung with mud and streaks of dried blood, but each step fell firm and true, as if every paw print was a promise not to fail. Across its broad back lay little Grace Harper, her pale cheek pressed to Ranger's sturdy shoulders. Unconscious, she somehow did not slip or tumble off, because with every determined stride, Ranger kept his spine straight and shoulders steady, muscles working to bear the fragile weight without faltering. "Oh God, Lucas!" Aaron gasped as Ranger finally sank to the floor, wheezing, but his eyes never once leaving Grace's small form. Lucas dropped to his knees, his chest tight as he brushed trembling fingers through the rain-soaked fur. "It's Ranger, the Harper's dog. He brought Grace back by himself." Paramedics flooded the lobby, kneeling beside the girl. Ranger fought to lift his weary head one last time, eyes pleading as if demanding they swear she was safe, before surrendering to exhaustion. Beyond the glass doors, the rain drummed harder, cold and relentless, carrying the tang of brine and the whisper of secrets not yet ready to die. As Ranger sank to the cold station floor, the only sounds left were the rain tapping at the glass and the ragged breath of a dog who had carried home their faintest hope. But before anyone could grasp why he risked everything for Grace, they had to look back to where all the loss began. 10 years ago, Daniel Harper was Maple Harbor's quiet pride, a wildlife biologist who braved storms to track migrating birds, side by side with his wife, Dr. Lily Harper, recording every heartbeat of the forests hugging their coastal town. Always at their heels was Ranger, a 2-year-old German shepherd, strong, keen, and loyal to every step the couple took, no matter how far into the wild they roamed. Ranger wasn't just a well-trained search and rescue dog, he was a true member of the Harper family. At home, he slept curled right outside Grace's door, his steady breath a living shield for her innocent dreams. On nights when Daniel stumbled awake in a haze of whiskey, he often found Ranger sitting silently in the dark hall, eyes glowing with patient watchfulness. Then came the stormy night when Lily fell lifeless in their warm, pine-scented kitchen. Daniel returned late from field work, found the door ajar, blood smeared on the hardwood, and Ranger, barely 2 years old, deep knife gashes across his back, lying pressed against Lily's cold body, his wet eyes locked on Daniel in a wordless plea for forgiveness. But grief devoured Daniel's reason. He saw no wounds, no guilt in Ranger's eyes, only a single cruel truth. The dog Lily trusted most had failed her. The day they buried Lily was the day Daniel shut the lab door for good, hung up his field coat, and poured himself into bottles of whiskey. Long nights under a weak lamp, beard unkempt, hair greasy, breath sour with stale liquor. Every time he caught Ranger's unwavering stare from the hallway shadows, he glimpsed his own ruin staring back at him. Ranger, undeservedly blamed, was dumped at the town's rescue shelter. Yet Grace, just 4 years old, cried herself hoarse, refusing sleep or food until her mommy's Ranger came home. Daniel was too broken to argue, so Ranger returned, not forgiven, but called back by the echoes of grief echoing off 2 empty walls. Since then, only Grace had faith in him. Ranger lay guard outside her door, barked sharply when Daniel shouted through drunken rages. Daniel knew, no matter how many times he drove the dog away, Ranger would stay, a mirror of all he hated in himself, yet could never abandon. 3 days before, Ranger dragged Grace back from the brink of death. Maple Harper still dozed beneath its blanket of early morning fog. Daniel Harper sat motionless in his battered pickup truck, a paper coffee cup empty in his trembling hand, eyes fixed on his little girl as she slipped through the gates of the Hillside Elementary School. Ranger perched in the truck bed behind him, gaze locked on Grace, unwavering. "Be good today, princess," Daniel murmured. Grace only nodded, reached up to stroke Ranger's head, then disappeared behind the gate, shoulders swallowed by her faded backpack. That day, Daniel planned to head straight to the construction site on the southern edge of town, a job that barely kept him in whiskey and paid Grace's school fees. He had no clue that within hours, everything would come undone. Past noon, his phone buzzed. Grace's teacher, voice trembling, "Mr. Harper, Grace left school early. A woman came to pick her up, said she was her aunt, that there was an emergency at home. We thought you knew." Daniel's vision spun. He had no sister. No aunt had ever been allowed to pick up Grace. Back at the job site, Ranger, tied under a tree by the trucks, let out a long, piercing howl that made every laborer pause mid-swing. Daniel raced back to the school like a madman. By the time he arrived, the playground was deserted, swings creaking in the breeze. Ranger hurled himself against the truck window, snarling, scratching at the glass. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't shove the dog away. He let Ranger leap into the back seat, let him growl, let him rage. Chief Bennett pulled up barely 10 minutes after Daniel called in the disappearance. Deputy Aaron Hayes gathered volunteers for a search party. Everyone believed Grace had just wandered off. Everyone except Ranger. The shepherd tugged at his leash, nose to the wind, straining for the narrow trail that led into the pine woods behind the school. "Hold him back!" someone shouted. "He's disrupting the search grid." But Daniel, for once, listened to the only heart that hadn't lied. He loosened the leash. Ranger bolted, a streak of fur swallowed by the forest's shadows. That night, Maple Harbor trembled awake. Flashlights carved trembling paths through the underbrush. Loudspeakers crackled over the hills. And what did they find? Nothing but 3 faint footprints, fading into an abandoned clearing, as if Grace had never been there at all. Daniel sat slumped against a patrol car, a bottle rolling at his feet. He barely felt Ranger, fur caked in mud, pressing a heavy head against his thigh, whining hoarsely, "I know where she is. Trust me this time." But humans still distrusted the dog. They leashed Ranger tight, locked him in Daniel's laundry room to keep him from contaminating evidence. No one knew that behind that door, while humans argued, a life was slipping away, and the one creature who knew the way was caged behind wood and iron. Ranger waited until the latch cracked beneath claw and tooth, until he vanished into the storm, this time with only one mission: bring Grace home or never come back at all. Ranger dashed down a narrow alley, rain slicing his back in icy lashes. He weaved along a muddy stream, following Grace's scent, clinging faintly to the tiny knit hat she had dropped near the school fence. Human smells tangled with hers: cheap cologne, stale tobacco, wet leather. A confusing mess that could never hide the sweet trace of Grace etched deep in Ranger's mind. On the first night, Ranger crossed more than 10 kilometers of woods, steering clear of any trail humans might patrol. By dawn, he curled up beneath an ancient oak, licking fresh blood from his side, drifting into shallow sleep with ears twitching at every forest rustle. A few hours later, he jolted awake. The wind brought Grace's scent again, stronger than before. Tracking her, Ranger slipped down rocky slopes, pushed through a wild reed marsh the fishermen called Shark's Back, for its jagged stones poking through the mist. His paws left crimson dots behind, his fur knotted with cold mud. But his eyes never wavered. On the second day, the rain eased, but the ocean wind howled through the cliffs. Ranger paused at a faint path descending toward an abandoned headland, once home to an old lighthouse, now only mossy stone walls and crumbling wartime tunnels beneath. He flattened the ground, ears back, nose sweeping fast. Grace's scent was thick here, mixed with rusted metal, antiseptic, and heavy footsteps. 2 men paced before a tunnel door, cigarette smoke curling through the damp air. Whitaker wants the kid moved tonight. Search teams are getting too close. The voices, half bored, half wary, drifted to Ranger's ears. He circled wide along a bluff, finding a vent shaft barely wide enough for his battle-scarred body. Too tight for any adult man, but just right for a 4-legged warrior. Ranger squeezed in, belly scraping cracked concrete. Skin split anew where old scars lay. He did not whine, only panted, nostrils flaring until they brought him to a heavy steel door. From beneath it came quiet sobs, enough for Ranger to know he had found her. "Ranger, is that you?" Grace's voice was raw from crying. Ranger whined softly, pushed his nose through the gap, licked her trembling fingers through cold steel. "They're going to take me away. Ranger, help me." But the door only opened from the outside. Ranger backed into shadow just as the guard returned with a dripping tray of food. As the man turned his back, Ranger sprang, teeth clamped on the guard's wrist, twisting hard until the tray crashed to the floor. The man's scream ripped through the narrow corridor. Grace darted forward, crawling through the unlocked door as Ranger pinned her captor down. "Run!" Ranger's growl rumbled deep, nudging Grace toward the narrow escape. She understood, gripping his fur as he guided her through the vent. He could not follow, but he grabbed her shirt with gentle force, pushing her through just as pounding footsteps thundered behind them. Another man appeared, gun drawn. Ranger spun, hackles bristling. The bullet tore through his shoulder, warm blood splattering stone. Pain sharpened to rage. He lunged, jaws locking onto the gunman's arm, dragging him down in a frenzy of fur and fangs. In the dark, growls and muffled cries tangled into chaos. Outside, Grace fled barefoot into the night woods, tiny feet bleeding, the echo of shouts and gunshots chasing her. Deep within the bunker, Ranger still stood guard at the door, blood pooling at his paws. Yet his gold eyes blazed with the only truth he knew: save Grace, at any cost. In the moment Grace slipped through the narrow vent, Ranger knew retreat was no longer an option. Heavy footsteps pounded behind him, and the hot, metallic scent of his own blood grew thicker with every heartbeat. Yet Ranger's eyes held only one vision now: Grace, tiny, trembling, curled up under a wild tree, waiting for him. With a final, desperate lunge, Ranger slammed the last guard to the ground, then staggered out of the bunker's yawning mouth. Outside, the ocean wind screamed like blades slicing through fur, but Grace's scent stayed bright in his mind, guiding him through the frozen reed marsh. He found her crouched by a rock ledge, lips blue, lashes frosted with mist. She managed a whisper, "Ranger." So cold, before her eyelids fluttered shut, breath catching. Ranger licked her cheek, then lowered his battered body to the ground, nudging the hem of her torn coat onto his back. Half conscious, Grace clung to his neck with the last of her strength. Ranger dug trembling paws into the earth, forced his haunches steady, then rose, bearing her weight like an oath etched in bone. The homeward journey began this way, beneath a night that refused to end. Ranger trudged across broken stone paths and mud-choked trails, slipping, stumbling, fresh blood mixing with swampy mire beneath him. Each time his legs gave way, he fought up again, never whining, never pausing, as if stopping meant Grace would fade forever. By dawn, Maple Harbor's faint street lamps glowed pale gold through the fog. Ranger saw it then, the police station porch, where Bennett always sipped coffee on rainy days. The old wooden door swung slightly ajar. Ranger limped across the threshold, bones rattling like dry twigs, but his back stayed level so Grace would not fall. A beam of light swept over them. Ranger let out a hoarse growl, then collapsed onto the cold, tiled floor, body shuddering but head twisting just enough to check that human hands had lifted Grace safely from his bloodied shoulders. Only then did he gasp, eyelids drooping but fighting to open, terrified to close them before he was sure she was truly safe. In the hospital room, flooded with harsh white light, Grace lay curled on the bed, fingers clutching a scrap of torn fabric the Peace Ranger had bitten to push her through the vent. Chief Bennett and Special Agent Megan Porter, dispatched by the FBI's Richmond office, sat close, voices gentle. Daniel hunched in a dark corner, hollow-eyed from sleepless nights and whiskey's ghosts. "Grace, sweetheart, can you tell Agent Megan what happened? Who took you?" Megan asked softly, her eyes level with the child's tear-streaked face. Grace drew a shaky breath, her voice a breeze through cracked lips. "A lady with brown hair. Dr. Rhodes. She said she'd take me to see Mommy, but then she tied me up." Daniel slammed his fist against the bed rail, knuckles splitting open. Evelyn Rhodes, Mabel Harbor's beloved vet, the one who'd come to the house, checked Ranger for free, the woman Lily had trusted with every vaccine, every checkup. Megan tightened her grip on the file in her lap. She'd suspected Rhodes ever since reading Lily's old veterinary reports. And Whitaker? The revered mayor, champion of the youth camps, hero of charity galas, the mastermind behind it all? He'd thrived for years because people blindly praised his wilderness camps for saving runaway kids, never knowing he sold them off to monstrous rings far from these quiet shores. Chief Bennett twisted his hat in his hands, pale to the ears. God almighty, all those times he stood up there crying about the children, I believed every word. Daniel said nothing. He saw again Ranger's eyes, the way the dog always growled when Whitaker stepped near their porch. He'd cursed the dog, kicked him out back. Now he understood. Ranger had always known. Only Daniel had been blind. "Grace," Megan pressed on gently, "do you remember any strange smells? Or did you hear anything about the place you were kept?" Grace shook her head, then suddenly jerked upright, eyes wide. "Cologne. It smelled sharp, like burning." "Same smell Mr. Whitaker wears," she blurted, voice cracking with sudden certainty. Megan and Bennett exchanged a grim look, the one clue Ranger had tried to tell them all along. Megan stood, exchanging a glance with Bennett, her mind racing ahead of her words. "First thing, we sweep Rhodes's clinic and Whitaker's offices, top to bottom. But more than that," she turned to Daniel, voice lowering with an unspoken plea. "Tell me everything about Ranger. What did Lily trust him to carry that none of us ever saw?" Ranger stirred, a low whine breaking through labored breaths. Even drained, he forced himself upright, eyes drilling into Megan as if begging her to understand. Megan knelt, brushing a gentle hand over his ear. "You've got something more to show us, don't you, boy?" Daniel's voice rasped, throat dry. Lily used to say Ranger was her walking vault. She taught him to hide anything important. When she died, I never found the file she was working on. Megan's eyes widened with realization. He has carried Lily's evidence all these years. Bringing Grace home was only half the mission. He's here to deliver proof. Grace squeezed Ranger's paw weakly. Mommy taught him a game, find the treasure. If she said those words, he'd look for her secret hiding spots. Maybe Mommy left him a treasure to keep safe. Daniel squeezed Grace's hand tighter. He felt Ranger shift closer, pressing a heavy head into his thigh. No more growls, no more bitterness. Only eyes that seemed to say, I brought her home, now protect her, finish this. In that bright room, no one dared to voice the truth, hanging thick in the air. The real storm was only beginning. Ranger had led them back to the monster's tracks, and this time, no one would silence the truth again. The next morning, before the summer rain had dried from the backyard grass, Daniel, Bennett, and Special Agent Megan Porter stood behind the weathered Harper house. Ranger, bandages still seeping fresh pink, stubbornly hobbled alongside Daniel all the way to the old water tank. All right, buddy, show us Lily's treasure, Megan murmured, kneeling eye level with Ranger's drooping ears. Ranger snuffled the ground, inching slowly around the rusted tank, the spot where Lily once knelt, scrubbing clothes late at night while he guarded her ankles. He paused at an old willow, pawed the dirt gently, whining, then flicked his eyes at Daniel. Daniel dropped to his knees, hands trembling. each handful of damp soil splattered against his sleeves. In less than 5 minutes, his fingers scraped metal, a small tin box, dented and spotted with rust. Megan slipped on gloves, lifted the lid carefully. Inside lay faded photos and a bundle of yellowed pages sealed in brittle plastic. Lily's handwriting still clear. List of missing children. Whitaker file. Bennett crushed his police cap in his hands, voice cracking. Good Lord, how many parents buried empty coffins and still believed he was their hero? Megan turned page after page, eyes flashing at each name, each date, each note about Whitaker's summer camps. This is the sword to cut him down. It wasn't just Rhodes. It wasn't just Grace. He deceived an entire generation. Daniel hugged Ranger close, voice shaking so low it was almost a prayer. I doubted you for 5 years. You never failed Lily. You never abandoned Grace. Ranger closed his eyes, pressing his head into Daniel's sleeve. The cold breeze tugged at his fur. His tail gave a faint thump, as if he'd finally laid down the last burden he'd guarded alone. News of Whitaker's indictment thundered through Maple Harbor like a storm, but everyone knew a cornered wolf doesn't surrender without claws and fangs bared. Daniel knew it, and Ranger knew it deeper than any human. On the third night since Lily's files exposed the truth, state troopers still patrolled the Harper house around the clock. Porch lights swept the yard. 4 armed guards rotated shifts. Daniel only dared close his eyes, knowing Ranger lay pressed to Grace's door. But evil didn't smash locks. It slithered in on a whisper of poison. Around 2 a.m., Ranger jolted awake. His ears twitched at a soft groan outside. Through a crack in the window, he saw a guard slump by the patrol car, gun still half-holstered. A pale mist curled through the yard. A chemical tang curling up Ranger's nose, raising every hackle. A breeze tugged at the kitchen window, just barely ajar now. Ranger growled deep, bolted off the blanket, claws skidding on hallway wood as he tore toward the sound. Whitaker stood there, coat rumpled, eyes sunken mad with desperation, revolver clutched in a shaking fist. His voice croaked, "I gave you everything, Daniel. Paid for her school, kept you afloat after Lily, and this is my thanks?" Daniel burst into the kitchen at Ranger's heels, glimpse of the guards outside stirring weakly. But inside it was just him, Whitaker, and the dog, and Grace asleep down the hall. "Whitaker, it's over. Don't drag Grace into this." Daniel braced the hallway, breath tight with fear that Grace might wake to this horror. Whitaker laughed, a ragged cracking sound. He swung the gun past Daniel's shoulder, leveling it at Grace's door, cracked open an inch. "She comes with me, one last voyage. The sea keeps secrets, like it always has." Ranger's snarl split the kitchen air like a thunderclap. He lunged, jaws locking around Whitaker's gun hand. The revolver roared. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Daniel dove in, tackling Whitaker onto cold tile. They wrestled, limbs thrashing, breath ragged. Whitaker wrenched free an old hunting knife. Steel winked under the harsh kitchen light. Daniel gasped. "Ranger!" No second command needed. Ranger blood seeping from reopened wounds. Launched himself between steel and master. The knife punched deep into his shoulder. His howl rattled every window pane. But he did not retreat. His jaws clamped tighter. Claws tore at slick tile, every muscle screaming, "You will not touch my family." Outside, patrol sirens wailed back to life, guards rousing, lights flaring. Megan and the quick response team smashed the door wide just as Daniel wrested the knife from Whitaker's fist. 3 officers pinned Whitaker to the kitchen floor, cuffs snapping cold around wrists wet with dog blood. Daniel collapsed beside Ranger, arms wrapping the battered shepherd's head, breathing in smoke and fur. "Easy, boy, easy. You did it. You kept them safe. I'm sorry, so proud of you." Ranger whimpered once, muzzle nudging Grace's hand where she knelt sobbing beside him. In those dimming golden eyes flickered a single, gentle truth. She's safe. They're safe. Outside, Whitaker's final screams tore at the dawn as he was dragged away. Inside, the dog once branded worthless lay spent, but unbroken. Back pressed to Daniel's knee in a silent vow, I guarded them to the last heartbeat. When the wailing siren dragged Whitaker away from Maple Harbor, Evelyn Rhodes knew her own escape was over. In her cold, sterile veterinary clinic, she fumbled through drawers for a passport, but beyond the blinds, flashlight beams flickered like judgment. A water bellowed, "Evelyn Rhodes, open up. You are under arrest for kidnapping, destroying evidence, and aiding a fugitive." Rhodes froze. For years, she'd been the clean hands hiding Whitaker's filth. Now there was no door left to flee through. The pounding grew louder. At last, she let the passport drop, sank into a wooden chair, whispering, "I'm sorry." At Maple Harbor Station, under harsh interrogation lights, Rhodes hunched over the table, trembling hands folded under Agent Megan Porter's stare. Megan's tone cut like wire. "Whitaker's finished. All that's left is you. Want leniency? Tell me everything." Rhodes broke into ragged sobs. I believed Whitaker at first. He said the camp saved lost kids. But then, children vanished. I shut my eyes, pretended not to see." Megan tapped the thick file. "And Lily?" Rhodes choked, tears crawling down the deep lines of her cheeks. "Lily was too smart. She traced every wire, every payment. I begged her to stop. She wouldn't. That night, I was near the back room in my clinic. Ranger burst in, attacking a man with a knife. He dragged Lily toward the door, but the man had a gun. I heard the shot. Then, just Ranger lying over her, blood soaking the tiles." Rhodes buried her face in shaking hands, a broken laugh bursting through tears. "I lied to myself that shutting my eyes was mercy, but all I did was chain a good dog to my sins. I thought hiding it would save me, but it damned me instead." Megan scribbled notes, voice icy but steady. "So Ranger risked his life for Lily, and Daniel kicked him out, blind to everything?" Rhodes nodded, shoulders quaking. "He was too loyal, too stupidly loyal. For 5 years, I checked his wounds in secret because I owed Lily. I'll sign everything, but please, save Ranger. He guarded the Harper family when none of us did." Megan snapped her notebook shut, eyes hard but less angry now. "I will, and you'll testify. Maple Harbor will know every inch of Whitaker's rot, and yours." Rhodes wept, a late soul crumbling under truth. While outside, Ranger, the dog damned for half a decade, lay dozing in Grace's arms, Daniel's hand buried in his fur, a living witness to Lily's love, Rhodes' buried guilt, and the dawn breaking through long years of shadow. The next afternoon, Maple Harbor's tiny police station swelled with people. State troopers, federal investigators, reporters elbowed for room. Whitaker emerged from his first interrogation with the same smug mask until the flashbulbs caught the file Megan held high, a list of the vanished, buried by his lies. The townsfolk fell silent, eyes that once adored him now cut like knives. Ranger stood beside Daniel on the front steps, bandages stained, head lifted anyway. A child brushed trembling fingers through his mane and whispered, "Thank you for bringing Grace home." At sunset, as the last squad car whisked Whitaker into the dusk, Bennett gripped Daniel's shoulder, voice raw with truth. "You lost Lily. You almost lost Grace. But because of Ranger, you didn't lose everything. He did his part as a dog, and more. He kept the faith you threw away." Daniel nodded, tears splashing onto the thick fur. "From now on, no one calls Ranger just a useless dog again. He's family." Far off, the sirens faded into the night. Ranger closed his eyes, muzzle resting in Daniel's lap. Everything he'd guarded was now laid bare in daylight. The final promise Lily trusted him to keep. 1 month after that blood-soaked night, Maple Harbor awoke from its long nightmare. News of Whitaker's trafficking empire buried every fake glory he'd built, but it also dragged sunlight into the town's darkest corners. In the old Harper cottage, a quiet dawn spilled through faded curtains. Grace slept soundly with her head pillowed on Ranger, the same dog once banished, now her unwavering sentinel. The deep wounds on his shoulder and belly had slowly knit closed under the care of a new, kind-hearted vet with no ghost ties to the past. Daniel sat on the porch steps, a cup of cold coffee cradled in his hands. He watched Ranger breathe easy in the morning light, a weight lifting off his chest, the burden of blame he'd shackled to a creature that had only ever carried Lily's last gift of faith. Once, he'd told himself, if Lily hadn't died, everything would be different. But now, he saw the truth. Lily never truly left. Her courage and love still filled this house. In Grace's eyes, in Ranger's drooping ears, in the warmth Daniel had finally let back into his hearth. That day, Maple Harbor gathered in front of the town hall. More people came than for any Christmas parade. They didn't just celebrate Whitaker's downfall. They came to see the German shepherd who had risked his life for Grace and brought justice back home. Daniel led Ranger onto a wooden stage, his hand resting on the dog's head, an apology no longer needing words. Grace stood beside them, hugging Ranger's neck tight, her gaze fixed on him like he was the hero of every story she'd ever heard. The mayor bent down, fastening a silver medal around Ranger's neck, engraved, Guardian of Faith. Amid the thunder of applause, Ranger didn't bark or howl. He simply tipped his head, tail wagging once, accepting the overdue honor with quiet grace. Reporters crowded Daniel. Any words about Ranger? Daniel looked at Ranger, at Grace, then up at a sky clear after so many storms. All I can say is, sometimes what matters most isn't what we cling to, but what stays, even when we foolishly push it away. Ranger forgave me. Because of him, my family is still whole. On the last summer night, Grace drifted to sleep, hugging Ranger on a new bed by the window. Daniel turned out the light and pulled a chair onto the porch. He tilted his head back to the stars and whispered into the hush. Thank you, Lily. You were right all along. You never really left us. Ranger kept my promise when I couldn't, and he showed me the one thing worth believing. People break, drift, lose themselves, but real love never disappears. Inside, Ranger shifted closer to Grace's hand, his breathing steady as a lullaby. Outside, Daniel closed his eyes, his heart lighter than the starlit sky. And Maple Harbor, after all its storms, finally saw a true dawn.